Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to discuss how to support and sustain bilingual education and dual language programs. My name is Erica Flores. I'm a resource specialist at the Long Island R.BERN. And before we get started, I just wanted to share a few things with you. So if you haven't already, I invite you to visit our website, join our listserv, and follow us on Twitter. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find recordings of past webinars and instructional snapshots. That includes our 4 previous webinars that we've done with Susanne. And at this time, I welcome everyone to sign into the chat using your first and last name, district and title, so we can confirm attendance and provide CTLE credit. So today we have Susanne Pena with us again to share her expertise. And Susanne has been an educator in the K-20 setting for over 16 years. She started her career as a teacher in Title I schools in the New York City Department of Education. She also served as district coordinator for ESL bilingual programs and world languages for Amityville. And she served as an instructional coach, supervisor, and evaluator of bilingual and ENL teachers at Amityville. And was a dual language program coordinator at PSIS 180 in Harlem, New York. Susanne also held the position of adjunct instructor at Brooklyn College for bilingual multicultural education. She's the former director of project manager for the Dual Language STEPS grant at the University of Central Florida. And she is currently lead consultant at SMP Education and is pursuing her doctorate in adult education at the Kansas State University. So without further ado, welcome Susanne. I am going to turn the presentation over to you and stop sharing my slides so you can start sharing yours.
All righty, good morning everyone. Buenos dias, buenos dias. Super excited to be back with you guys. I feel like this is like the last one for this year. So, I'm gonna definitely miss everyone. But in any case, we're going to be talking today a little bit about dual language and TBE programs, implementation and sustainability, okay? And today's webinar, we're going to be focused a little bit more on the administrative portion of it. So if you're an administrator or in a quasi-administrative position, or you're an instructional coach, or even if you're in the classroom but are part of a committee, I'm going to be sharing some of the foundational, I would say, like some of the infrastructure that you need in order to implement and sustain either a dual language or TBE program. So as you know, this is some of my contact information. Those of you that have been with us prior to today, you already have this. Those of you that are new, my email is Susanne Pena at smpedconsulting.com. We have our website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have any questions or think of anything after the presentation, I will put this up again, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Just some housekeeping items. As always, make sure to leave your video on if you can. It just helps for that interaction. Please mute your mic when not speaking. Participation is key, so if you can, either raise your hand with the raising your hand icon on your toolbox in Zoom, or you can unmute yourself and share. I will be pausing throughout the presentation to kind of get some feedback from you. But if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it on the chat box as well. And speaking of chat box, we'll be using the chat box to ask and answer questions as well. So feel free to use that feature. So the goals for today, we're going to learn about best practices for administrators. We have more of an administrative focus today, as opposed to maybe some of the other webinars that had more of a classroom focus. Today is more of a infrastructure, sustainability, and implementation. So it's more geared towards administrators and those that are in an administrative capacity of sorts. For TBE and DL classrooms, we're going to build and add to our administrators' toolbox and learn from each other, of course, as any other webinar that we've had. So today we're going to start quickly with a discussion question. So if you can share on the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself and share. List the top 5 things that you consider to be the most important in a dual language or transitional bilingual program. What are the top things that you need to have, or you think that these are the key features to have in either of these 2 programs? So you can go ahead and share those on the chat box, or you can go ahead and just unmute yourself and share, either or.
I think one thing, this is Ann Logan from Patchogue Medford.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, how are you, Suzanne?
Good, good, good.
I think that one thing is crucial is having high language expectations for students. Often you think that we have, in Patchogue Medford, we have a K-6 dual language program, which is a side-by-side. So there's an English component, one day a Spanish component, the other. And I think it's just really important to have teachers have similar high expectations for language development on both sides, not just for the L's learning English, because there is that little bit of accountability piece with the nicest lad every May, but also on the Spanish side to make sure that those students have enough, not just exposure, but opportunity to practice second language. We find that sometimes, like, we use this expression a lot, like English is the fat kid on the seesaw, where, like, you know, we're always struggling to make sure that we give enough opportunity in full participation academically for Spanish. So I think having high expectations for, for second language development is really, really crucial.
And thank you for sharing that, Anne. And I will be talking a little bit more about that. But you are right on track with that. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, yes, English is a very dominant language. And so in the case of either or TBE or DL classroom, yeah, it could overpower any other language, and especially since we live in a world, so outside of that, let's say TBE classroom, the students are going to find that, they're exposed mostly to English throughout the entire day, right? So we need to ensure that those opportunities to build their language repertoire in that other language, in that target language, are really there. And we are really keeping an eye on them so that they don't kind of become, as I always say, Spanish for fun.
Exactly.
Because it tends to become Spanish. I call it Spanish for fun. We do a couple, all right. We look cute. It looks pretty. Hola, ¿cómo estás? And then we're done.
Right.
And that is a problem. And it's because, there's a lot of things happening there, but it does become, like I said, Spanish for fun. So you are right. I see that
you have concrete suggestions about in your past practices about how to really reinforce that. I feel like for the dual language teachers, especially the Spanish side, they have that skill, but I feel like sometimes maybe counterparts or like a whole building in general maybe hasn't embraced the idea of that language, that language.
Absolutely. And it starts from, and we'll talk more about it. And when you see the rest of the presentation, you're like, oh yeah, exactly. Okay. So we're definitely going to be talking all about that. And there's there's guidelines to follow about everything that you have mentioned. And I see Erica's face because this is like, it's everything going to be mentioned in the follow-up slides. So definitely we're going to talk all about this. Erica, do we have anything? I see the chat, I know, but I don't know.
There is lots in the chat,
Oh,
actually,
wow. Okay.
a really
So,
long list of things, everything from, classroom resources and content material, assessments, training, teacher planning, collaboration, co-teaching, scheduling, having targets, like language, content and language targets. I guess it means like aims and objectives, so to
yeah.
speak, rigor in both languages, community involvement. So I think they're all right
This
on
is
target.
perfect. This is right on target. All of these things you're going to see throughout the presentation that they're right on target with the guiding principles. And that's what we're going to just talk about today. And then we're going to analyze where we're at a little bit. So without further ado, as I always guide everything that has to do with bilingual education, I guide it on research, on principles, right? It's not like we say in Spanish, a lo loco, el garete. We don't do that. We have to guide it on research, on best practices. So there is a document that has the best practices, and it hence the name Guiding Principles for Dual Language Education. And they have a free, as I mentioned before on my previous webinars, they have a website where you can download the virtual or copy of this document for free, or if you would like a hard copy, there's a fee involved. But everything that I'm going to mention today is guided upon these principles of dual language education. Oh, froze a little bit here. Okay. Oh. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the guiding principles. Okay, so where did they start? Where did they come from? And how are they being used? So these were based out of New Mexico. They have dual language program standards, and from there, then they were developed, the guiding principles. They were prepared by a national panel of researchers, teachers, administrators, parents. So it was a whole plethora of people that were there, and just looking at best practices for dual language education. It was developed by the Center for Applied Linguistics, and that's actually where you can find the document. It is in its third edition, and it has programmatic standards and expectations organized into strands, and then it has key points and all of that. And it is intended as a reflection and self-assessment tool for the program and to guide educators. And when I mean educators, I don't mean only classroom teachers. I mean educators as everyone, from staff to even parents, administrators, district administrators, everybody. And down on the bottom, there's the website where you can get the copy, or it's also hyperlinked onto the picture in the previous slide. So now I always say it because everything that has to do with the guiding principles is really governed by 3 pillars. And although they put them as the 3 pillars of dual language, I have actually gone and taken that out and crossed it off. And I'm going to call it like the pillars of bilingual education, because these are just the 3 pillars that really should guide every decision, every lesson plan, everything that you do pertaining to bilingual education, whether it's TBE or dual language. This is where you need to base it off. If it does not meet any of these 3, you know what? Take it to the side and maybe rethink it and just evaluate it and see how we can shape it a little bit better so that it fits into these 3. The first one is bilingualism and biliteracy. The next one is high academic achievement. And the third one is social cultural competence. Like I said, if it doesn't fit any of these 3, you know what? Time to reevaluate. And when we're looking at what are those critical components of effective bilingual programs, so I'm going to use the term bilingual programs as the umbrella. Okay, so bilingual education is the umbrella, and everything else falls under that, that being ENL, that being TBE programs, one-way, two-way, and dual language programs. Okay, so everything falls under that. And within that, you have some additive programs and you have some subtractive programs, right, of language. So the critical components that we need to focus. The first one is administrators and instructional personnel who are knowledgeable and supportive, right, of the programs, whether it's TBE or dual language, right? Qualified staff and teachers. A program model that is clearly defined. So what I mean by that is that it's defined in every single grade that the program is being implemented in. It's not that it's clearly defined in kindergarten, but in third grade is like, oh, we don't know. And then fifth grade, we totally forgot about it. No, it's clearly defined throughout, and it is followed with fidelity. And we're going to talk about fidelity a little bit, because fidelity, it's not, we're going to start something that looks fantastic in kindergarten, but then when we come to fifth grade, guess what? We forgot about it because there's a testing grade and, you know, we got to focus on English, English, English. It doesn't work like that, okay? If we're going to do a program, we have to follow it through with fidelity. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? It's just like a diet. If we don't follow the diet with fidelity, guess what? It ain't gonna work. Trust you me, I have tried. No shortcuts here, okay? Providing that parent engagement, and I change it from parent involvement to parent engagement, because the parents are going to be a key factor in whichever program you have. Because remember, education starts at home. So we need to make sure that our parents are engaged throughout this process, whether it's TBE or DL. And the separation of languages. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, because there is, and I put the little asterisk there, because there are moments that we can incorporate translanguaging, but those have to be meaningful, purposeful, and they have to be planned carefully. Okay. So I'm going to pause before I continue. Any questions thus far? Or any?
No questions, Suzanne.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. So we're going to talk about the strands. So there's 7 strands from the guiding principles, and these really should guide everything that you're doing along with the 3 pillars. Okay. And you're going to see how everything is just all together. But the first one is we're talking about program structure. Strand number 2 is curriculum. Strand number 3 is instruction. Strand number 4 is assessment and accountability. Strand number 5, staff quality and professional development. Strand number 6 is family and community. And number 7 is support and resources. So we have to look at our programs through these 7 strands. And how are we doing based on the 3 pillars? Okay, makes sense? All right, and remember these, because there's always games when I do a webinar. So now let's talk a little bit about program structure. Okay, and there's certain components that we need to have when we're talking about program structure in either a TBE or DL classroom. First off, we have to make sure, as administrators, as members of maybe a committee, or you know, as district administrators, or so on and so forth, we have to make sure all the aspects of the program are working cohesively, right? They're achieving, and I split it more into 4 core goals, but really we're talking about, you know, because I put bilingualism and biliteracy separate, but they're together if you want to put it in the 3 core goals. But you have bilingualism or multilingualism, because we don't know, right? We have our students that may be learning a 3rd or 4th language. Okay, so we have to make sure that we are accountable of that. Academic achievement and social cultural competence. So these are making sure that all the components of the program are working cohesively for those goals. Okay, if they're not, then we have to reevaluate. Ensure that there's equity for all groups. So that means that as Anne had mentioned earlier, so there's equity also for, let's say, students that are learning, let's say, the target language as well, right? There's equity for all the groups, okay? Even if we have students that have IEP, we have to make sure that there's equity, that we have our English learners, we have our Spanish or target language learners, right? Our new language learners. We have to make sure that the program is accessible for all. We also need to make sure that our leadership, right? And I'm going to talk to my administrators on this webinar today, okay, that is strong, effective, and knowledgeable, okay? With that being said, you're not expected to know everything as leaders, okay? Because you don't know everything, okay? We don't know everything, right? As human beings, we don't know everything. But understanding that within that, not knowing everything means that I want to know more, all right? I want to surround myself with a team, with people that are knowledgeable in this area. So that is the first step. We don't have to know everything, but we have to surround ourselves with the right team, with people that are knowledgeable. So going and tapping into the resources that you have, going ahead and learning more. If you have not done so, and you are a leader, I suggest that you go ahead and maybe take some of the courses that have to do with bilingual education, or purchase some of the books that are out there. There's one that I am a big fan of, and it's actually, I have it right behind me. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull it out for a minute. And as you can see, I have it, you know, with a lot of little post-its because it's fantastic and it's very practical. It's called Dual Language Instruction A through Z, and it has practical applications for bilingual education regardless. And it's actually a practical guidance for teachers and administrators. So it's great. And those are some of the books that I definitely recommend. If you don't even know where to start in terms of getting more information, I definitely would recommend starting even with just reading the guiding principles of dual language. It is a great document that will give you information, and it'll actually be kind of the diving board to learn more about bilingual education. Okay, effective process is in place to make sure that we continue. After we implement these wonderful programs for our students, we have to make sure that we can sustain them. And that's the biggest issue that we tend to have. Prior to the CR 154 and having that, accountability in terms of making sure that the programs were, you can't just get rid of a TBE or a DL program as easily as it was in the past. In the past, it was easy and, it faded away, right? That can't be done anymore. And we have to make sure that we're putting the framework, and we're sustaining these programs, and we're doing it with fidelity. Okay. Now, what does that mean? What do we look for when we're looking at program structure, right? So we're going to ask ourselves a couple questions, all right? And we're going to think a little bit, where are we with that, right? Do we have a cohesive team formed? Do we have a plan? Has it been revised? Because a lot of times we put these plans together, right? And nobody seems to know where they are. We never see them again, right? We're like, oh, yeah, we have it there, right? But are we really following it? Are we revising it? Do we need to revise it? And the answer is yes, you need to revise them, okay? They're not meant to be like the document for eternity, okay? You have to make sure that everything is working correctly, that it's working correctly in every single grade. If it's not, guess what? Back to the drawing board. And that is what it's all meant to be. With bilingual education, it's okay to go to feel like you're constantly on the, back to the drawing board. It's okay, because that means that you are being effective. You are monitoring. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It's actually one of the strands, okay? Assessment and accountability. We have to make sure that we constantly progress monitoring, okay? Is there a clear and succinct message been prepared and aligned with the mission and the vision and the goals of the program? So guess what? I'm going to ask, this is not one of the questions that I had. I'm going to ask, how many out there have a mission and a vision and have clear outlined goals for whichever program? Quickly, how many of you? So you could just raise your hand or say we do, or be honest and say, I've heard of something, but I got no idea where it's at.
I see no hands in the chat. I'm getting some starting to come in with comments of not sure. So
Okay, so those of you, the sign that there's no hands going up and saying we have one, I know where it's at, I know what it says, or I'm not sure. Yeah, let's start by that. Because if we don't know where we need to go, right? If I, like, let's say I have my cell phone and I need to go somewhere. But if I don't tell Siri or I don't tell Google Maps where I need to go, guess what? It's not going to help me, right? Same deal. If I don't have a clear mission and a vision and goals for the program I am implementing as an administrator, guess what? My staff, my teachers, parents, everybody else, including myself, we have no idea where we're going. We won't know what is right, what's wrong, what we need to monitor, what, hey, this is not working. How are we going to know if we don't have a mission and a vision and clear goals? I did a PLC with the L.I.RBERN, and one of the activities that we worked on was going and getting the mission and the vision for our programs. And we found out, guess what? We didn't have any. And so we worked on just clearly figuring out how to write that. And if you don't have one, as an administrator, you're not supposed to write it on your own. Okay? Don't do it in a silo. No, you're supposed to go ahead and get a team. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Are team members or teachers / school administrators comfortable with explaining the why? Why is it that we have a DL or TBE program? If I go to my secretary, or if I go, because usually secretaries are the first ones that when people come in, they're the first ones that parents see, right? And a parent is going ahead and enrolling their child, and they ask, hey, why do we have this? What is this all about? If your staff cannot answer just in a very short, they don't have to be very elaborate. If they cannot answer that, Houston, we got a problem. Okay? That doesn't mean that they have to be teachers in the dual language or TBE program, but they need to understand the why. And if we don't have that articulated, we need to reevaluate that. Okay? Now, having outside experts, okay? Because again, like I said, we don't know everything. So having people from the outside, the L.I.RBERN is there, okay? Other resources are there. Having people from the outside that can bring a neutral voice and identify some of the things that may not be there, may not be working correctly, right? And having those people come in and actually give you some guidance is crucial, because a lot of times, right, we may not see what's there because we're in it too much. So having some people outside that may ask us the questions is very important. I've actually done this with some of the schools in Long Island. I've gone into some of their meetings and I've sat there and I've been just asking questions, and they're like, oh, we didn't think about that. Oh, that's a great idea. We need to look at that. And I would just pose questions, more of a Socratic method, so that they start thinking of, hey, we may need that to be implemented. And that is all that it is, right? Having professional development that has been prepared for all stakeholders. So I'm not talking about just professional development for our teachers. We're talking about professional development for our teachers that are not in a TBE or dual language program, so that they can understand what's the importance of this program. Why is it needed? Why do we need to follow certain guidelines, right? Professional development for parents, professional development for staff. It is needed, and we need to make sure that these professional development sessions are targeting the right audience, right? It's not a one size fits all. Our community partners have been identified. Do we have those community partners? If you do not have them, then it's time to kind of start knocking on a couple doors on our neighbors, okay? Making sure that we have those partnerships, because this is actually a community venture, okay? Making sure that all stakeholders are represented in the planning process. If you are in the planning stages, or even if you already have a dual language or TBE program implemented, you have to make sure that the people that are in that team for planning, there's representation of all stakeholders. So that means that it's not just comprised of the administrator or one administrator or maybe an instructional coach and a few teachers, right? No, it means that you have representation from each grade, that you have representation from even students, okay? You have representation from parents, so that everybody is in that decision-making process. Okay, I saw that the chat went off, and I was like, I wanted to make sure. I just saw that.
No, that was just responding to the initial question regarding the mission statement.
Okay, so now we're gonna go and look at the program models for dual language and for TBE. This one is first for dual language, okay? So there are different models, okay? And it all depends on which one you're using and what is the purpose of your program. Again, this is guided by your goals and your vision and your mission and all that, right? We have the common 50-50 model, okay, which is the most common in New York, and where we have half of the instruction is in the target language and half of the instruction is in English. So there's two language groups. Ideally, you would have that your student groups are comprised of half of the students that come from the target, that speak the target language at home, and then 50% of your students that are come from monolingual English speaking homes, okay? Or they can speak but another language, but English is their primary language, okay? That's the most common. Now you do have a 90-10 two-way, which a 90, that means 90% of the instruction initially is delivered in the target language, right? And then 10% is in English. And then they gradually, as the grades go up, they gradually go and shift the percentages in order to get to a 50-50. So what I mean by that is that you first, let's say you started in kindergarten, you do a 90-10. 90% of the instruction is going to be in Spanish, let's say, okay, as a target language, and 10% of the instruction is going to be in English. And then let's say first grade, and it changes to 80-20. Then second grade is going to be a 70-30. And then by third grade, you're going to do a 50-50. And you continue with that 50-50 model onward. The reason for this is, as was mentioned by Anne in her comment, yes. So what was it that you said, Anne? I believe it was like your analogy about the seesaw. In any case, being that English is such a dominant language, you have to make sure, right? This is a program model that ensures that students are really, really getting as much of the target language, especially in the earlier grades, so that it builds a basis for them, okay? In this particular model, that two-way, you still have the two language groups. So that means your classroom is comprised of 50% students who come from homes that speak the target language and the 50% English speakers, okay? Then you have a 90-10 one-way dual immersion model, that is more of, you're still going to follow that 90-10 and gradually move it up to a 50-50, approximately around that third grade. But your classroom is predominantly comprised, okay, of students that speak the target language, but it's still a dual language program, not model, not to be confused with the TBE, okay, because you are gradually going to get to that 50-50, and the instruction is going to go 50% English, 50% target language, okay? So these are the three models, three most common models of DL program across the country and across the world. And it all depends on which one you find that is the best for your student population. I'll even give you an example. I am the product of a it was more of a 90-10 program model, but a one-way dual language immersion model in Puerto Rico. So that is what I went to school in. And then once it hit third grade, then it really was more of a 50-50. And then, but the majority of the students were coming from a Spanish-speaking home. So if it gives you a little bit of context. So needless to say, it does work. Living proof right here. So now we're going to look at the time allocations or program model for a TBE program, and these are based off of New York State. So yes, they are program models, and by the way, I just put the K through 8, but there's 9 through 12. Okay, you can look it up, and if you have any questions, go. The L.I.RBERN is more than happy. They have it on their website. This is public information. Okay. So this has to do, and it gives you a guide as to what you should be teaching and how much of it should be taught in what language according to the students that you have based on their results on the NICET or NICETEL, okay? So the key here, what I always kind of tell, I try to inform my teachers or administrators. I always look at the classrooms, right? There's various ways of doing this and how you can set it up in a TBE, right? You can go ahead and set it up in a way that depending on how many TBE classrooms you have in a grade level, sometimes they have done more of the students that are transitioning and above, they go here, and then the students that are entering and emerging, they go into the other TBE classroom. That's one way of doing it. Then you may have all in one, you may only have one TBE classroom per grade. But again, this is all depending on how many students you have. If you have more than 20, and let's say you have like 50 students that speak the same home language, and you only have one TBE program or one TBE classroom per grade, I'm going to suggest that you start reevaluating that, okay? Because that means if you have 50, right? If you have more than 20, it's time to reevaluate, and it's time to say, okay, maybe I need to look into having 2 or more TBE classrooms, okay? Because then that means that we are not completely meeting all the needs of our students, okay? So with this, I always caution kind of teachers and tell them that you're going to look at your amount of students, how many of your students are at the emerging, entering, right? Because you have to make sure that you are really meeting the minimum, and I'm going to say it again, this is the minimum that you can provide students, okay? So that means, let's say that I have the majority of my students, I have one TBE program, the majority of my students are in transitional, right? They're transitional. But I do have some, right, that are entering. Well, what I need to make sure is that I need to plan for me to teach at the entering level. So this is I need to have all of this in place for my entering students, okay? Because if I go here and I just focus on my transitional students, guess what? I am not then meeting the needs of my entering students, according to the state, okay? So it's okay for me to give them more to my transitioning than for me to give less to my entering, if that makes any sense, okay? All right, so if we have that, that means that I have to give home language arts. So that means if we're doing Spanish as the target language, that means I'm going to be doing a whole entire subject that is SLA, Spanish language arts, not to be confused by giving math in Spanish. Okay, this is separate. I'm going to be teaching just like ELA, SLA. Okay, home language arts. I have to do that. And then I'm going to be doing a minimum of 2 content areas that are going to be bilingual. That could be math, science, social studies, right? And then I have to do the other components of ENL, right? And then I have to do integrated ENL and ELA, okay? This is the bare minimum, okay? Any questions thus far? And if you have any questions, I'm gonna put it back to the L.I.RBERN. Obviously, you can contact me, but the L.I.RBERN is there just in terms of TBE. And TBE, there's actual guidelines from the state that you have to meet, okay? And those students need to be, they are required to get those minutes and those times, okay? Now, let's talk about curriculum for a little bit, okay? And curriculum, I'm gonna stop everybody, and I always tell people tell me, okay, well, we purchased this curriculum. Well, okay. Well, curriculum is not something that you go ahead and purchase from a publishing company. Those are programs. A curriculum is actually how everything, all the subject areas kind of all together, right, with the standards and everything, how does that get put all together to know what let's say a 3rd grader needs, okay, and a 4th grader needs to know by that grade. That is a curriculum, okay? So that means math, science, social studies, all of that, standards, all of that is a curriculum, not something that we purchase from, pick one of the programs. That's a program, not a curriculum. So when we think about curriculum for a DL or TBE program, we have to ensure that that is always meeting our goals that we have established, our vision, our mission, our goals. It's making sure that it's meeting bilingualism, biliteracy, high academic achievement, is doing, social cultural competency. If it's not meeting any of that, then we need to revise and edit. Okay. And we're constantly doing this. This is not like, okay, we made let's say we drafted our curriculum map. It's there. We're done. Okay. Wash my hands. Ta-da-da. I'm done. Yay. Never to be talked again. Well, now we're constantly reevaluating and we're editing it to make sure that our students are still achieving high academic achievement. They're getting there, right? That social cultural competency is there. They're actually being bilingual and biliterate. If it's not meeting that, then it's time to reevaluate. I always give the example. I have one school district that I'm particularly working with in down here in Florida. And that district, what happened was they were doing beautifully with their lower grades, right? Their kindergarten, first, second. But then they gave an assessment, a school-wide, actually school district, a district-wide assessment, and they found out in Spanish that, hey, no, we weren't doing so hot with the 3rd graders, 4th graders, 5th graders, and 6th graders. We were not, right? The students had lost a lot of their Spanish. So right there, their bilingualism and biliteracy pillar is out the window. So they weren't doing that great. And then they started noticing that the students were struggling as well with their with the achievement on the WIDA. So down here they use the WIDA instead of the NICESLAT, right? They weren't achieving. So right there, high academic achievements out the window. So those were two big pillars that they were not fulfilling. And in this dual language program that had been there for over 10 years. And so that is when you need to go back and revisit that curriculum map and figure out where the gaps are. All right. Before I continue, I just want to say, are there any questions thus far? Is this making some sense? Are you finding that these are some areas that I need to look into, or my school needs to look into, or I need to think about that? So I'm going to pause here for a minute and ask that question. Are you having those lingering questions of this is something I need to think about? And you can unmute yourself or put it on the chat.
Suzanne, I just want to mention that I'm really glad that you brought up this topic of purchasing a program and sort of calling it your curriculum. I think something that we forget sometimes is that nothing is one size fits all is not really going to work ever, and anything that is purchased will always need to be revamped for the students in front of you at that moment, and that can change year to year. So I really, I'm glad that you brought up that point about purchasing programs and just trying to deliver it as is without making the necessary modifications.
And that is one of the biggest problems. And so just to piggyback on what you mentioned, a lot of times we purchase these programs, and let me just give you a little bit of a background on a lot of these programs. A lot of these programs are drafted, right, by publishing companies. They're there. They're probably tested out in one scenario, right? Not in every scenario that we have in our schools across the country. They're tested in one particular scenario, and then they're packaged and delivered, right? And a lot of times we think, oh my goodness, this is perfect. This is fantastic. This is, okay, great. But when we realize is that we have to really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and see, okay, is it really meeting our goals? Is it, even if you haven't even drafted goals yet or a vision or a mission, what? Go back and look at the 3 pillars. Is it meeting these 3 pillars? Okay. If it's not, then that means, I'm not saying go ahead and toss it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we need to reevaluate it. We need to go ahead and figure out what we need to add, what we need to subtract. Is it meeting that social cultural competency component? If it's not, and I'm going to tell you, the majority of the programs are there, a lot of times are missing that social cultural component. Okay. So adding that, does it have both the does it have the standards? Does it have language objectives? Does it have lesson objectives? Usually they do that, but then they don't have the language objectives. Now, are those language objectives really meeting what we need them to meet in terms of the needs of our students? And those are all questions that we need to start asking ourselves, because like I said, it's not a one size fits all. Okay. So I know that there were some comments that came on the chat, but
so there are a couple questions. So one question is one teacher who is doing a bridge class with KN1, kindergarten and first grade, and is wondering what might need to be adjusted for that program.
Well, in a bridge class, it's a little bit different because you are talking about kindergarten and first, okay? But you need to ensure that just the same way that you make sure that your student, you're meeting certain standards, right? And you're teaching to the needs of your students, you're going to also have to do that, let's say for language, right? If you're doing it, depending on the subject area, you're going to have to assess where your students are at in both languages, find out what they need, and make sure that in that lesson planning, in that curriculum mapping that you're doing and all of that, you are addressing those needs. And you're constantly going to have to be evaluating this and monitoring for progress.
Another request is if you happen to have any recommendations of assessments to measure proficiency for Spanish, and this teacher is asking specifically for second grade.
And we're going to talk about that on Strand, on the assessment Strand. I will mention a couple. And the great thing about me is that I'm not married to any of them. So I can give you, the 411 and some of the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of deal. But we could definitely just, I'm going to put a pin on that question. And if we could, if I, by some reason, forget to address it, please, the person who asked that question, please just remind me so we could definitely, I could give you some suggestions. Okay. All right. So let's move it along. And then talking about making sure that that curriculum effectively integrates technology. It promotes the 3 goals, the attainment of the 3 goals. It's standard based. Okay. So I'm going to stop there because a lot of times, and I know this question is always there. All right, but we have standards in English, but we don't have it in target language. Wow, I know that. There's no standards in Spanish in New York. I get that. But we can look at what other states are doing. We could use those as guides, okay, to give us an idea of what's happening, right? And see how we can make sure that we are addressing those needs. Okay, we can look at assessments. We can look at the standardized standardized test, right? The 3rd grade, 4th grade, and whatnot, and look at it in the target language, okay, that you're teaching, and see what's being expected of students in terms of language, and that will give you a guide of what you may need to teach. Okay, so if they have like, tier 2 words, tier 3 words, make sure that you're teaching those. Not just leave it for the test, because a lot of times we tend to do that. So making sure that you're doing this throughout. And I am definitely, you have to do this regardless of the program that you're doing, whether it's TBE or dual language, okay? All right. It froze. See, you gotta love technology, right? There we go. Okay. So what does it look like, right? So as I've mentioned, making sure that instruction is integrated within the curriculum, that there's ELA and, let's say, for example, SLA, right? That we are teaching literacy in the target language, okay? It's not just done through the content areas alone. Language objectives are there. They're incorporated into the curriculum planning. And also I'm going to throw a little special one. Not only language objectives, lesson objectives, but also cultural objectives, okay? Making sure that we're integrating it to the students' experiences. Ensure that language and literature are developed across the curriculum, cross-curricular planning, okay? There's a lot to be covered, especially in a TBE and DL program. So you know what? The best way to approach it is cross-curriculum planning, because that way students are receiving language instruction throughout every single subject area. The content has to be rigorous. It has to go by standards. Even if we don't have Spanish standards or target language standards, we need to make sure that it's not Spanish for fun, okay? That is very important. We're not just teaching, necesito ir al baño. Okay, we're going past that and making sure that our students are able to continue throughout this dual language, especially with a dual language program, that they're able to continue it in middle school and high school, that they don't come up, and even a TBE, let's say that a student enters a TBE program in 4th grade, that when they're getting algebra, okay, and they're still in that TBE program and they're getting algebra in middle school in Spanish, they're able to be successful in algebra in Spanish in the middle school, because they've already had the language base, okay? Leaders and staff should be aware of the 3 components contributing to student success, okay? Again, going back, if you don't remember anything, remember BBM, and that's bilingualism, biliteracy, and multiculturalism. If you don't remember anything else, okay? That's a great way to also remember it. That social cultural component, that academic achievement, and also make sure that all the aspects of the curriculum are interrelated. So that means even if you have art and music and PE, all of these components are really, really interrelated into the goals and the mission and the vision of the DL or TBE program, okay? Even if they're not speaking Spanish, but at least the social cultural component can be there, the high academic achievement, all right? There can be some accommodations, some scaffolding. Those things need to be in place. Any questions thus far? I'm gonna have.
We are good to go. We can keep.
Okay. And just some of the rules of the games. Those of you that have participated before, they might sound familiar. Those of you that have not. So for this game, it's a trivia game based on the information that I have given thus far. And we are going to ask everyone to well, we're going to go ahead and just use the raise your hand icon. So you can find that on your toolbox. Okay. And then I'm going to put kind of Erica on the spot, and I'm going to ask her to please keep tabs so that way we know who our winner chicken dinner is. And there are prizes, and I always send these prizes via email. So the winners, please go ahead and send your an email with your name and just letting me know that you were a winner. And there are gift cards to either Target or Starbucks. So let's get started. Okay, everybody ready? Make sure that you have your little raise your hand because you need to provide the answer. Okay. All right, so first question goes, how many strands are there?
I see Celia raised her hand first.
So Celia, go ahead. Oh,
was it a Celia? Okay, it's now it's down now, so maybe that was accidental. Okay, so we have M. Sanchez.
So 7 strands.
Very good. There you go. So there are 7 strands. Awesome. So Erica's going to keep tab for me. All right. Now, who can tell me what are the 3 pillars of, as I made it, I'm going to put bilingual education, really dual language, but bilingual education. What are the 3 pillars?
All right, Claudia, you're up.
It's biliteracy and bilingualism, high academic achievement, and social cultural competence.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. All righty. Now, next question. What is strand number 1? Oh, M.
Sanchez again.
Program structure.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Now, what are some examples of program models for dual language?
All right, Claudia.
You got your 50-50, your 90-10 two language way, and the 90-10 one language way.
Very good. Awesome. And then what are the 2 types of division of languages? Oh, I didn't put that one. I put that one, and actually that's coming up. Oopsie. All right. So that's going to be the bonus. I'm going to switch it up for one question. Actually, yeah, that's coming up in the next one. Who can tell me what is the doctorate that I'm completing? What is it in? I had to switch it up real quick. And Sanchez, go ahead.
Adult education.
Adult education, very good. All right, so we have actually, who do we have? I'll pick the first. I guess if there were three or there's two, I believe.
Yeah, it's two. They have those trigger fingers ready.
I know.
Claudia and M. Sanchez.
All right, so both of you, please go ahead and send me an email with your full name, because the gift card has to be assigned with a full name and whatnot. And then let me know which one you want, Target or Starbucks. And thank you for participating. I love it. I love it. It feels like you guys had that little raise a hand icon really quickly. All right, so let's go into strand number 3, and this is instruction. And with instruction now, it's a little bit different, as we said, with curriculum, right? And then this is the actual pedagogical tools that we're using. And the instructional methods that are going to be used in the classroom, and as an administrator, that's what we're looking for, are research-based, okay? And they're ensuring the fidelity of the program. So that means administrators, even if you don't know the target language, but when you walk into a classroom, okay, you should be seeing if let's say the subject area is supposed to be taught in Spanish, okay, you should be hearing the teacher speak. I would say like 99.9% of the time in Spanish. Okay. Now, there can be moments where the teacher has translanguaging, okay, happening, but they have to be planned out. So you should have been able to see those in the plans, in the lesson plans, right? They have to be planned out. They have to be purposeful. So that means that the teacher is implementing those for a reason. That means because the student needs, it's a scaffold, things of that nature, okay? There has to be a point to them. It's not a lot of code switching. It's not like, okay, I couldn't come up with a word in Spanish or things like that, and so I just put something in there. No, it's not like that. We're not doing code switching. If we have to make sure that we're doing this, because if not, that going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth is not helping the students, right? And then, especially as we mentioned earlier, English is such a dominant language that if we subtract from those moments where the students are actually getting, let's say, Spanish for argument purposes, if we subtract from that, then the students are we're doing a disservice to them. And especially in my TBE programs, okay, I'm going to caution you not to do this, okay? We already said that as a whole, but in a TBE program, if you continue to go ahead and subtract that Spanish component, let's say, what's happening is that you're creating, students are coming with these little, I call them like little lakes, and then they become lagoons, and then they become craters, right? Because they're not receiving that academic language in the target language, right? Or in their first language, let's say in this case being Spanish. So what we're doing is actually amplifying those lagoons that they may have, and we're just making them bigger by not really teaching them that academic language in the target language. Okay. And then when we go ahead, let's say they're in 3rd grade and we give them the assessment in Spanish, if the kid doesn't know what ecuación means, or never heard of the term because I keep on calling it equation, and I give them test in Spanish, what's the point? Right? They've never heard of that academic language. And that is a big problem that we tend to have when we look at, in my experience, when I've looked at programs as they move on to middle school and high school, there's a big deficit that students have when it comes to that academic language, and then they struggle so much. I mean, we spent all this time and effort putting all these classes in middle school and high school, algebra, calculus, whatever's needed, and then we put them in the target language, and guess what? The students we find out that the students are not performing well. And why are they not performing well? Because they never had the academic language in the younger grades. And we're like, but wait a second, they were in a dual language program, they were in a TBE program, what happened? Well, that's what happened. We weren't doing, we were actually doing a disservice and teaching more English than the target language. So instructional strategies that support the three core goals of bilingual education, right? We have to make sure that we still stick to that. Again, I keep on saying it. I feel like I sound like a broken record, but student-centered instruction is key. We need to move away from the teacher center, that lecture, obviously what I'm doing now, but we need to move more into the student centered model, right? There needs to be more activities, more lesson planning that includes the four modalities for both languages. That means reading, writing, listening, and speaking. That those activities are really, really seen all throughout the lesson planning. It doesn't matter what content area you're talking about, even in PE. I don't care even if it's PE and you decided to do PE, because I've seen a PE in Spanish, okay? Even if it's PE, all right, I should be able to see reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And I know it sounds crazy because people are going to say, like, Susanne, it's PE for crying out loud. But there can be listening activities, writing activities, there could be reading activities, right? There could be speaking activities in the target language, even in PE. There should be no excuse whatsoever. Okay? Now, instructional staff is effectively they integrate technology to deepen and enhance the learning process. So again, we've been doing webinars that have talked a lot of, now that we're doing a lot of distance, remote, virtual teaching. And there's a lot of technology going on. Moving forward, we don't know what the future holds for us in the next few months. That being said, we have to be very cautious, especially with technology. We can't just say, okay, we're going to put something cutesy or pretty, or that's a cute game or whatever. What's the point of that game? Okay. We don't want to just put kids on a computer for the sake of putting them on a computer and there's no purpose. It's not tied to anything. What is the purpose of that game? Is it tied to the lesson? Is it tied to the three pillars? If it's not, then you know what? Maybe we need to reevaluate it. We've seen it a lot of times, especially with our ENL. We see it with our Ls that they're put on a computer. They're like, oh, they're doing whatever. And that's technology, right? Well, what's the point? They're just sitting there. They're just on a computer. That's not good teaching. And that's what we need to make sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. But, you know, since you brought up this whole technology piece, in the chat, I did give everyone the link to our YouTube channel because Suzanne's previous webinars are on there, are posted there. And the amount of resources that she has shared throughout those 4 webinars, it's really amazing. So if you are looking for some quality tech tools or way to integrate technology, I invite you to watch those webinars. And after watching them, if you need any more information about any of the tools that she shared, please email me and I can share with you some of those links that we discussed throughout those webinars.
Yeah, check them out. I've actually looked for the good stuff out there. So make sure that that you look for them, and even within those, make sure that they're integrated into the lessons accordingly. Okay. All right. So let's talk about a little bit of a discussion question. Now we're going to go into that assessment component. So what are some of the assessment tools used to monitor the progress of the program and or students? So what are you using out there right now? If you're using anything, if you're not, it is a-okay. We're going to talk a little bit about assessment and progress monitoring.
No response as of yet, Suzanne.
So I'm going to guess, I'm going to take an educated guess that we're not doing as much progress monitoring or assessments.
Okay,
we're not using this.
Right. So,
Oh,
so a few things are coming in now. Here we go.
okay. Now they're coming in. Now
Time. We didn't give enough
Ah,
digital wait
and
time.
I spoke about that. You know what? See, I didn't implement my own strategy, right?
It happens. All right. So we have this ENIL and ERLA. We have Ames Web, FMP. Another person who also uses ENIL, DRA. Yeah. So I'm seeing repetition of those same a couple of assessments.
Okay. Now I'm gonna ask this. Those of you that mentioned DRA and FMP, are you using them in both languages?
Yes. One person says yes, they are in both languages.
Okay. Now that person that said the FMP, what are you using past third grade?
Teacher TC.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about assessments, okay, and progress monitoring. So when I talk about assessments, I see that a lot of you shared DRA, FMP, and whatnot. Using them in both languages is key, so we're on the right track with that. But also, when we're talking about assessment, we have to make sure that we talk about progress monitoring, not only the progress of our students, but the progress of the program. Okay, so what assessment tools do we have to progress monitor how the program is doing? So how is it meeting those three pillars? So the program has to be created and it maintains an infrastructure that allows for the support of assessment and accountability, right? So are we going back? Do we have surveys from parents, from the community? Are we making sure that we're monitoring the progress? Not only, let's say, if we have a dual language program district wide, okay, how does it look per building? Right? Where do we see that? Is it something that is actually being monitored in every single grade? Do we have something that allows us to monitor the progress of the students all throughout all the grades that are implementing that, whether it's TBE or DL? Okay. How we are progress monitoring those students as they go into, let's say, middle school. How are we finding out how they're doing? Okay, are they continuing to make high academic achievement? If not, then that's something that we need to look back. I give an example of, I worked with a middle school and they were going and they were transitioning. It was a feeder middle school and they were doing their dual language program. And they realized that when the students went ahead and to take the courses like life sciences and all that in middle school in Spanish, the kids were struggling greatly. They couldn't, I mean, I have parents telling me that the kids were were coming in, getting home crying because they were like, I can't, take me out of this program. I don't want to keep on doing it. And this was a dual language program and the kids were not, they had lost that love for Spanish, and it was so sad. They were so frustrated. And the reason for that is because we started looking and digging deeper and finding out that the problem was not really in the middle school. The problem was even in the elementary schools. And since this was a feeder middle school, the problem was in different elementary schools. And these were schools that had been doing dual language for a long time. But there was a problem. The kids were not being prepared adequately when it came to the target language. So we had to then go back and start looking at that and seeing where our gaps were. Now, is the student assessment being used aligned with the program goals, right? And state content and language standards, right? Do we look at those results? It's not just going ahead and giving the FMP or which is Fontes and Pinnell, or going ahead and giving the DRA. Are we going back and looking at those results, or are we kind of just saying, okay, we're done, I'm done, we never look at them again? No, are we using them to guide our instruction? And that's when I caution a lot of times, because we say, okay, yeah, I give a lot of assessments. But it's not just giving the assessments, it's looking at the data that those assessments are giving us. If we don't take the time to go ahead and look at that data, then you know what? Might as well don't even give the assessment. What's the point? And I'm gonna leave you with that, because if you don't look at that data, then it's pointless. And it's not just the administrator getting the data and looking, okay, I see that my fourth graders are not doing good on blah, 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 blah. Okay, no, it's sharing that data with the classroom teachers. It's sharing that data not only with the TBE or DL teachers, but also sharing it with the entire grade, with the entire staff, making sure that everybody's on the same page, reading off the same sheet of music, as they say, right? Not some people are playing salsa while the other ones are playing merengue and the other ones are playing bachata. And guess what? It's not going to sound very good, okay? I don't care who you are. It's not going to sound well, all right? Making sure that you have multiple measures in both languages, that you have data that is allowing you to see how the program is doing, okay? So that means not only your formal assessments that you have, but also informal observations, and your progress monitoring those as well. So that teachers are also making sure that they have their notes of how they had their conferences with their students and things like that, as well as your own observations when you walk in, doing snapshots, you know, things of that sort, to make sure where they're at and where are the areas that they may need some more professional development, because this is what's going to guide the professional development as well. Also, the student progress towards program goals and state achievement goals is systematically measured and reported. So not just making sure that, okay, we looked at it, okay, all right, whatever, blah, blah. Is it meeting our goals? Is it meeting the goals of state achievement? Are we there? Are we on track? Are we on target? If we're not on target, guess what? We need to go back and figure out what's going on, okay? And then making sure that the program is communicating the outcomes, right, to all the appropriate stakeholders, right? It takes a village, okay? It takes a village. So everybody's on the same page and making sure that we are communicating where we're at. And these are difficult conversations, because sometimes we don't want to go ahead and say, oh, we're not there. Well, you know what? These are conversations that we need to have. When I was a program, a dual language program coordinator, we had our dual language team, and it was comprised of teachers that were not in the dual language program. It had students, it had administrators, it had parents in there, and we had to have those serious conversations. So that conversation that made us a little uncomfortable, but like, we're not doing that hot. Okay, great. All right, let's put all our heads together to figure out how we can improve this. Because at the end of the day, this is our goal, this is our mission and our vision. Okay, if we're not there, then we have to go back to the drawing board, and it's okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to pause before I go into the poll question. And Erica, do we have any comments? Again, I can't see the chat. I'm so sorry.
So Claudia did have a question. I think it's a little more specific to her situation regarding these different assessments. And so I think her question really essentially is, if you're in a, you know, like a side-by-side model dual language, is that what you're asking, Claudia?
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly what I'm asking.
So go ahead. Tell us what's your question, Claudia.
So basically, we do Anil and Erla. So I'm usually the Spanish counterpart, and then I have the English counterpart. So when we're doing these assessments, should I only be concentrating on the Spanish and my English counterpart doing just the English part? Or should she be doing both so she can gauge it and then I tap in? I don't know.
So it's a very interesting question. Okay. I mean, the easiest way is you would be focusing on the Spanish component, and then your counterpart will be doing English, but you would still be talking about the results together. Does that make sense? I think that is the best strategy, and it's the easiest to implement. And I think because in that way, I don't know your counterpart, but I don't know if they know the, how the, if he or she is able to go ahead and analyze the results and see where they're at and where the students are at and really gauge the gaps when it comes to Spanish. So being that you are both the experts of each language, right? So I would go ahead and implement it. You do the Spanish, he or she does it in English, but then you have to have that time in order to go through that data and see where the students are not there, where if there's some areas that are common, because that's important, because then that means that you both, kind of have to tackle it from both ends, and seeing whether if it's a language issue, if it's a standard issue, or what's going on. Is it which student group is having is not meeting that one, or if you have a lot of students that are flying through this in, let's say, Spanish, but they're having a little bit more time, a harder time in English. So these are the conversations that you need to have in order so that you can both plan accordingly and actually address the needs of your students, in both sides. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Okay. Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Now let's go into our poll question. So how often do bilingual teachers and staff receive professional development geared to their specific needs? So as an administrator or even as a teacher, how often? Is it less than 25%, 25, 50, more than 50%? And when I say geared to them, I'm not talking about like they attended a PD that was really meant for the entire staff. Okay. And I gave them a couple minutes that I talked about, let's say, L's or something like that. I'm talking that it was really geared to them.
So everyone is still voting at this time,
Okay.
but the lead is definitely less than 25%.
Okay.
Majority of people are saying that, and I also see that in the chat. Also, someone has shared less than 25%. So,
okay, so we're gonna go with less than 25, I guess, with this one. I only saw maybe two that did more than 50, and I commend you. But the trend, it seems to be less than 25. So I'm gonna end the poll right now, which is a little alarming, because it really means that we need to look at that, especially in our TBE and dual language programs, as we see in the next strand, right? Oh, yeah, I did right. All right, and we're looking at the staff quality and professional development, right? We're looking at a program that when we are retaining our staff, when we're hiring, so this is for my administrators, and even if you are part of a hiring committee, because that can also be the case, okay? When we're looking at our candidates, we have to make sure that it's recruiting and retaining high quality bilingual staff. All right. As an administrator of bilingual programs, I made sure, like, I conducted the interview in Spanish, right? There were half of the interview was in English, half of the interview was in Spanish. We had candidates that I've done it in all the programs that I've not only helped implement, but also in the programs that I've supervised. I actually made sure that they were able to write. There was an essay component, okay, and they were able to write in Spanish. I needed to see their writing skills, because not just because you can speak a little bit of Spanish, okay, I'm gonna say this again, means that you can go ahead and teach calculus in Spanish. It's a whole different ballgame. So we need to make sure that we have people on our team that if as an administrator I can gauge whether or not that that candidate has all the language skills needed, hey, I need to be surrounded by people that may be able to gauge that for me. All right. Then going back to providing high quality professional development that is tailored. So going back to that assessment component, right, that we were looking at, making sure that that the areas that we're seeing, right, that we need help in, that we are not there, okay, that we're going ahead and we're looking for high quality professional development that meets the needs of our bilingual educators, so that then they're able to address the gaps that we're having that are shown in that in those assessments. Okay, so let's say, for example, I'm going to use Claudia's example, or Claudia's question. So in her question, she said, okay, so I'm going to give the Spanish assessment, right? So I'm going to pretend that I'm Claudia, and I gave the Spanish assessment, and I noticed that the students were not doing great on, I don't know, one particular standard, right? But then I also noticed that when I had these data chats with my colleagues, I noticed that they were also struggling. The students were also struggling with that same standard in English. So at that point, I was like, okay, all right. Well, I don't know what else to do. I'm out of ideas, let's say, right? I'm out of ideas. How do I go ahead? How do we go ahead and best address the needs of the students based on the standard that showed up in the assessment? So making sure as an administrator, it is our job to then go ahead and, let's say, provide the adequate professional development for those teachers so that they are able to go ahead and meet the needs of those students. So let's say getting more ideas, maybe getting the instructional coach and facilitating some. It doesn't need to be very elaborate, but making sure that the professional development is really meeting the needs of your educators as well, and that really ties into the needs of your student. Because if we go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to give them, let's say, going back to the example, I go ahead and I say, okay, I'm going to give them they can go ahead and attend a professional development that I'm gonna give in Spanish for the PE teachers. Is that really going to meet their needs, or are we just kind of putting them there because it has to do with Spanish? And those are the things that we need to evaluate. And those are guided by assessments, and those are guided by progress monitoring of both the program as well as students' progress, okay? And also the needs of the teachers and the educators. They will let you know. You need to also implement professional development that is also geared not only for the educators, but also for the parents. You may need to have these provided, and this is something that I did as an administrator, as a program coordinator. I made sure that there was professional development for the parents, because I had a lot of parents whose kid Spanish was not their first language, so they were also learning Spanish. And how can they help their kids if I wasn't providing something for them as well? So I needed to do that and make sure that there was money allocated for that, and there was a time, and there was all the logistical matters that need to be addressed. I was doing that as well. Any questions?
No questions. We really, in the chat, have just been discussing professional development. Some people expressing that it's difficult to always find quality free for professional development. Of course, shameless plug for the L.I.RBERN here. We are free. And, so we're doing everything we can to help meet your workshop needs. And, someone else mentioned full day PD and sort of wanting more of that. Obviously, when things return to 2000 and normal, and go back to offering those full day workshops and things of that nature. Right now, we are just working with our webinars for the time being, in order to do as much as we can.
But you know what? Even if just for now, until, I love that. I might permanently borrow that, Erica, until 20,000 and normal resumes to schedule programming. hey, a great place to start is just look at the L.I.RBERN YouTube channel. There's great resources right there that that teachers can now go ahead and start using, right? That's somewhere to start for right now, right? Until things get to some sort of normalcy. But in the meantime, there's a place to start. But even if you don't, even if you, if that doesn't even meet your needs, I believe that the L.I.RBERN, you could reach out to the L.I.RBERN. You could go ahead and say, hey, you know, let's say that we're back into the classroom as everything is normal. And then you say, hey, I need some more professional development on this particular area. Do you recommend someone? Do you know somewhere? Because the L.I.RBERN takes these suggestions and these needs, and then they address them through bringing people like myself. And that's pretty much, you know, and then they have the webinars based on the needs of the school districts, and that's how they guide their the information that they're providing as well. So go ahead and reach out to them, and they're free. I love free. So there's nothing better than free. So go ahead and do that as well. And also build the capacity within your school so that teachers can learn from one another. You have experts in your building that you may not have thought about. Reach out. Trying to get that team in place will help you go ahead and get professional development also established. Okay. So also making sure that the program collaborates with other groups and institutions to ensure staff quality. I'll tell you, reach out. I did it as a dual language program coordinator. We reached out to CUNY. We reached out to other institutions that were willing to come and help us out, and just give us some pointers and tell us, you know, and give us some professional development and whatnot. It was just great, or at least show us where we could go. When I in that role, I was able to go to a professional development that was being offered by Ofelia Garcia, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'll be right there. And they were like, yeah, come over. Also sharing, and actually a big problem that we tend to have is that we don't want to, we forgot the day that we went to kindergarten and we learned sharing is caring. And so a lot of times we have the resources, sharing with neighboring school districts, okay? Looking at what they have and sharing, and having and establishing those relationships as well. Sometimes we try to teach in silos, and we forget that we can go ahead and reach out to others. I did it as an administrator in Amityville. I used to reach out to everybody and anybody, and including the L.I.RBERN. I was on a first name basis, and I was on a speed dial. Hello? And I would call all the different administrators. I'll be like, hey, I have a group of teachers. Can I go in and check out a class, or can I go and see your high school? You're doing a TBE program. What are you doing over there? Okay, I've heard good things. Can I go and check it out? And that is okay. And most of the times, people will be willing to share what they have. It's just a matter of asking. Okay. So going to our family engagement or parent engagement component, that family and community, we have to start thinking, and I want to stress this even more so. Right now, we have seen how schools are a pillar of the community. Okay. If you didn't think they were, guess what? They are. And so schools are no longer just schools or community centers, and making sure that we establish those bonds with the community is very, very important, as well as creating that infrastructure to have a positive and active and ongoing relationship with the family and with the community. It's very important. Throughout when I was in Amityville, I made sure I knew my parents needed E&L classes. So you know what, they needed that, because if I want my students' parents to be able to help them with the homework in English, guess what? I need to teach them English. Very simple. So if they don't know English, they can't teach them and help them with the English homework at home. So that's a problem that I needed to address. That was an area of need that we needed to address. So we made sure that we put ENL classes at night, and we surveyed our parents and made sure, hey, you know, what's the best time? So we had them at night. We had them on a Wednesday. We had one of our teachers do them. I used to go in there a lot of times and bring them donuts and coffee, because a lot of them were coming from like working like 2 and 3 different shifts, and you know, they were there till 9 p.m. and they were, you know, they would bring their little ones, and it was okay. And I would also use it as a moment. A lot of them couldn't attend the board meetings or couldn't attend some of the meetings that were happening in the school. So I would bring some of the information of what was happening in the school district, and I would bring it to those meetings, and I would give it to them in Spanish as well, so that they were up to date of what's going on. So these are important things that we need to do, that sometimes we're like, oh my goodness, I need to branch out of the box that we're in, and we need to make sure that we establish those relationships, because at the end of the day, it goes back to that pillar, high academic achievement. If I want my students to perform well, guess what? I need to make sure that I'm also giving the tools to the parents so that they can help their kids at home, because education starts at home. And then going with the promoting family and community engagement and advocacy through outreach activities, support services aligned with the 3 core goals of bilingual education. I'll give you the example of the school that I was in Harlem. I always say it. I've never seen such a better example of that in one building. And they were able to have in there, we had a dental clinic that was completely free. It was done by Columbia University. It was free. All we had to do was just provide them with the space, and they had the dental clinic there for the students. They had an optometry clinic by SUNY Optometry, completely free for the students. They had a medical clinic as well, where the students were able to get their vaccinations and so on and so forth. We had we had not only classes in Spanish, but we had also like ENL classes. We had for free, we had job career building skills classes on how to write your resume and things like that, because those were the needs that our families had, and we needed to make sure to address them, because if we wanted to kind of level the playing field, we had to make sure that we were providing those as well. And then the last strand, last but not least, support and resources. And I know we've talked about these as being a need, right? And a lot of times we say, okay, well, one of the biggest issues that I have is that I don't have my resources in Spanish as a teacher, right? We don't have the resources. Well, when we're implementing, as an administrator, when we're implementing a TBE or dual language program, we have to make sure that we're constantly advocating and addressing and planning for making sure that these programs are successful. And that means making sure that we have the support and the resources needed. So we have to make sure that this is in our planning, in our budgets, that we're advocating for that. Because if we don't, then we're just doing a disservice. We're not meeting the needs of our program and what it's needed, right? Making sure that all our classrooms have classroom libraries in Spanish. If we don't have the budget, we have to make sure that slowly but surely we're getting there. I'm not saying that we have millions of dollars, because that's not the case, right? That's not realistic. And I see some people kind of smile, because that's not the realistic, but we have to make sure that if we don't do it all today, we are slowly building it, okay? And that's the important thing, okay? And we need to make sure that we do that. And if we don't have all the resources, because we can't go ahead and purchase them, if you look at my previous webinars, you can get some ideas of things that are free, that don't cost anything, and can be implemented immediately, and can start building those resources until you get something that is, you know, district wide or school wide or whatnot, but at least there's some resources there. And making sure that the program is equitable, so and adequately funded. Okay, and we have to advocate for this. We have to do a good job at advocating for it, making sure that we have the staff that is needed, that they're properly trained, that they have the professional development. And I know I am preaching to the choir, and I know that some of you are probably saying, okay, easier said than done. And I know this is going to be the cause of a lot of gray hairs. I know that for a fact because I lived it, okay? But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we advocate, we advocate, we advocate. I used to always be known as, okay, here comes Pena. What do you want? What are you asking for? And I would be like, okay, I gotta ask. What's the worst that they could tell me? No. But at least ask for it, you know, advocate for it, and make sure that you're planning accordingly for it. Because it's very, very important for the success of any bilingual program, whether it's TBE or dual language. Okay. Now, after saying all of that information. Oh, and before I forget, who was it that asked me that question about the assessment? So I'm going to go back really quickly and just briefly talk about the assessments, and I'm going to give just a few suggestions of what's out there. I didn't want to forget. Okay. So there's, as some of you mentioned, you have your FMP, which is Fontes and Pinel. It's a kit. It's a, like, you know, your paper base, if not, it's a running record. The only little hiccup that it has, it does come in English and in Spanish. I do like parts of it because it does have authentic books. So the books are different in the languages, so the students are not just memorizing things. The problem is that it kind of only goes to level N on Fontes and Pinel, so pretty much around that third grade. Then after that, you don't have anything else. So you know, you have to look for something that, you know, can help you carry you through. There are other programs out there right now. Many, if you use iReady for English, some districts do. It's very popular down south. They don't have a Spanish component, but they do have iStation. So iStation is not from iReady, it's a different company, but they do have very good assessments in Spanish. Okay, so, and you can use it from the lower grades all the way up. You have as well Star. Star also has some English and Spanish components. You have Apple, and that one starts, I believe it's third grade and up, and it has various languages. So those are some of, and those are all computer based. Again, pros and cons. You have to make sure that you have the computer accessibility in order to implement this. So if you're going to go with a computerized version, you have to make sure that you have the capability to be able to assess various groups at the same time, or if not at the same time, you have computer labs, or you have computer carts, or whatever the case may be, all the logistic components that are there. I know DRA, I used to use it back in the city. They do have the Spanish, and it's computerized. Back in the day when I used it, it was with the iPads and things like that. But it's good, but you have to make sure that you are, again, you have the time, and you have to make sure that you have that window of time to assess students. So those are some of the ones that are normally being used for dual language programs to assess where the students are at. And most of them, a lot of times, they have been moving to more of a computerized version. But you do, with that, you have to make sure that you have the equipment for it. And with that, it does come with its hiccups when the technology is not working and when something is not there. So it can be a little bit of a logistical nightmare, but it all depends on how much equipment you have and what is your accessibility. I've used both iReady and iStation and trying to coordinate those in terms of logistics and when and where, and not to overburden the kids with a lot of assessment and a lot of, there was only one computer lab and so on and so forth, and only a limited number of computer cards. So it was a little tough. But it all depends on what your needs are and what your budget is. That's the other one. And also as well as what your logistical requirements are. Okay, I hope I answered that question to whoever asked that. If you need more information, I have more resources that I could definitely share with you, kind of like the pros and the cons, as well as CAL, the Center for Applied Linguistics. It might be a little outdated. I believe it was from like 2017, but they do have a list of assessments out there, and they have it all laid out on a kind of an Excel sheet of sorts, and then it tells you whether it's computerized, paper-based, what it assesses, and then the grade level that goes with it. Okay, hope I answered that one. All right, so now that we have talked about all of these things and whatnot, I want you to have more of a reflective moment and see where you're at. What's the current reality of where your program is, TBE or DL, okay? And be honest, based on these 7 strands. And where is it that now you know you need to go? And kind of where's the gap? What are some areas that you've noticed that might be in the need of a little tweaking or a little revamping or a little editing? And I wanted to see if you could share those quickly. You could just raise your hand or unmute yourself and just quickly share what are some of those areas that you notice, or areas that you would like to continue to work on if you're already working on those areas and you have identified those areas prior to this workshop. I want you to go ahead and just let me know if what are your plans, what's your vision to change or to edit. So you could just go ahead and unmute yourself, or if you want to put it on the chat, that's fine. But
so someone shared community engagement and PDs for families. I actually also received a second comment about that, in a private message, just knowing that that's an area of weakness for their district, but not sure how to approach their administrators and bring that to their attention without sort of being pushy. So I found that pretty interesting. And I think that earlier this year during our PLC, Susanne, you had shared, if you're bringing a problem to an administrator's attention, try and bring it with a solution. So I reiterated that in the chat to said person. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind if you are in here as a teacher. And you're wondering, what can I do to help? How can I help my administrators to see some of these gaps? We're also seeing, again, another one with parent involvement. Assessment seems to be something else in here. But it seems to sound a lot about communities and bringing in the parents, both English and Spanish speaking parents.
And it's very important because, like I said, education starts at home. And I'll give you an example of what I've done those of you that are in the role of a teacher. Okay, I'll give you. I always talk about experiences and things that I've done. So and that comment that Erica made of don't bring problems, bring solutions. I'll give credit where credit is due. I got it from he's still my mentor, a great administrator from PSIS 180 in Harlem. His name is Dr. Peter McFarland, and he would always tell me, he used to call me by my last name, Pena, Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And it was always like that. Like he wasn't opposed to hearing about where the gaps were, but he wanted us to start thinking a little bit outside of the box, and thinking, how can we best address? Because it's very easy to just say, okay, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. But let's try to put our heads together and see, okay, and sometimes as teachers, we may have the best ideas ever. And I did that for a particular issue, and I brought it up to him, and I was like, you know what, we called him Dr. Mac. You know what, Dr. Mac, there's an issue. We had an issue with bringing in more parents, and we had the issue that the parents were not, they weren't coming in, and we needed them to come in. And so one idea was that we did an art workshop, and we did it through that component. And we had we had a local organization. It was called Studio in the School, and they came in. They helped me do an art workshop with the parents. I was able to communicate with them and do it in Spanish and all that good stuff, and really get the community involved. And it was awesome. But I brought him, we talked out the problem, because I came with him with like, okay, I'm thinking of a workshop. I'm thinking in these areas. Okay, how can I make it fun, and and this and that. And then we talked it out. But it was more of a welcoming than I guess I would have received if I just came like, okay, we got a problem. So that's always been my approach, coming in with solutions as opposed to just problems. And doesn't mean that the solution that we suggest might be the one that they go by, but it's a different, I guess it's a different understanding that will happen when you're coming with that approach, as opposed to just saying there's a problem. Okay. And so oftentimes, even in the sense of resources, okay, well, these are the resources that we have. This is what we need. We've looked at these resources. We've figured out some ways that we could take a little bit of here, a little bit of there, whatever, but we still need this. That's a better approach than me going ahead and saying, hey, we don't have anything for Spanish. You see, and that it kind of lowers a little bit of the guard. So that's always been my philosophy, and it has worked thus far. So I'm gonna keep with it, I guess. Any other questions aside from the parent engagement? And I tell you, if you start with that, with the parent engagement, and motivating your parents to be part of the equation, the results are going to be phenomenal. And I think it's a great area to start. It's one of the hardest, but it's one of the most rewarding as well. So with that being said, that brings us to basically the conclusion of today's webinar. I leave you with this information. I want you guys to go ahead and just reflect upon it. It's a lot of information. See where your programs are at, where you want to take them. As an administrator, go back to your buildings and see where you're at. If you're a teacher, you can go and share some of this information with your colleagues, even in your planning or whatnot. Even if you can't even go there, but just seeing where you're at with even in your own classroom, looking and figuring out where you're at, and then moving forward. I often told the group that I had in the PLCs, I was like, okay, maybe you can't draft a vision and a mission for the entire school, right? You're just a teacher, yeah, you're in a teacher capacity. You can't change all of the entire world. But you know what? You can start with a mission and a vision in your classroom of what you want your program to be. And now you have a guide that helps you. So that being said, thank you again. If you have any questions, or you need any more information, please go ahead. You can contact me, email me, reach out to me, as well as you have your R.BERN for resources as well. Thank you again. Muchísimas gracias. And I wish you all a great day.
Thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Susanne, for being here. I do, before we go, would like to remind everyone to return to my learning plan. I just would like to show you how you can complete an evaluation for today's session. If you return here, you click on session workshop evaluation, and then this little clipboard. We really value all feedback. And we thank you for being here. And Susanne, we thank you so much for being here. And we hope that you got something really meaningful out of today. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.